the average tempo Russian advance at something like 400 square kilometers a month, which is not that much. In a year, they managed to occupy less than 1% of Ukraine. So basically, Ukraine is struggling to stabilize the front line. Basically, the problem is that both Ukraine and Russia expect to achieve better conditions if they stay in the fight. And this situation haven't changed yet. So while it might change in a few months, maybe close to the end of this year, maybe next year, but I don't expect a major success of these negotiations at all.
Welcome to Ukraine Insight, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes for context and clarity, uncovering people and ideas shaping Ukraine's present and future. Brought to you by Kyiv Insights.
My name is Mykolaj Suchy. I'm an analyst at Kyiv Insights. I work on researching and writing about the battlefield, and I'm joined by Glib from Come Back Alive. Glib, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Glib Voloskyi. I'm a strategy analyst from Come Back Alive Foundation. Our work mainly is to analyze the battlefield negotiations and all the geopolitical dynamics surrounding the Russian-Ukraine war, primarily the strategic dimension of it. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for your time. So I want to go first to the battlefield and then to the negotiation room. And I want to understand, in your sense, where are we at? We've seen in the past a war of maneuver. We've seen attempts to take Kyiv. We saw the 2023 counteroffensive. But to me, I have a sense that in this phase of the war, we're at a phase where we're on an attritional battlefield. What's your sense of where we're at on the battlefield and what that means for Ukraine and also for Russia?
In terms of the battlefield, the character and military actions remains pretty much the same. It's operational warfare. We don't see that much movement in the battlefield, even though there are some. The average tempo Russian advance at something like 400 square kilometers a month, which is not that much. In a year, they managed to occupy less than 1% of Ukraine. So basically, Ukraine is struggling to stabilize the front line, but Russia also struggled to achieve a significant breakthrough, which would have a strategic impact.
And what's your sense, when we're thinking about progress, where are we at on the negotiation track? Are we making progress there? Are we going backwards? Are we, what are we seeing from the most recent round of negotiations, and where do you expect a breakthrough might come, or do you not expect a breakthrough at all?
The negotiation teams has recently been changed, and both sides report better mood during those negotiations. But the problem is, it was never about personalities. It's not like the previous negotiators had some personal problems or the personal lack of efficiency, which prevent from achieving a breakthrough. Basically, the problem is that both Ukraine and Russia expect to achieve better conditions if they stay in the fight. And this situation haven't changed yet. So while it might change in a few months, maybe close to the end of this year, maybe next year, but I don't expect a major success of these negotiations as well.
And can you walk us through, when you say that both Russia and Ukraine expect to improve their position by continuing to fight on the battlefield, what's first maybe Russia's theory of victory, and what's Ukraine's theory of victory when it comes to the battlefield?
Russia is betting on three primary scenarios. One is the breakthrough on the battlefield, and here they betted the manpower deficit that Ukraine experiences. They hope that even though they doesn't have much of advance now, if they keep pushing, the Ukraine will eventually collapse and they will be able to advance quickly deep into the heartland of Ukraine. Importantly, this is not only about pushing the battlefield, but also extensive information campaign to undermine mobilization efforts of Ukraine and hence aggregate all those problems with the deficit of the human resources. Another scenario and another factor of their action is attempts to undermine the international support for Ukraine. Those are both coercive action, informational campaigns, corruption of Western officials, attempts to bring power under Ukrainian forces, but also carrots like offers of the economic favorable economic terms, renewal of the energy export, access to the Russian mineral resources, and the things like that. Basically, if Russia managed to achieve that, the balance of power will turn in their favor, and Ukraine will likely not be able to hold the front line for long. Last but not least is the attempts to break the will of the Ukrainian population to fight. And this primarily manifests in terms of the informational campaigns, but also in terms of the continuous strike on the Ukrainian free infrastructure, heating and energy we currently experience. So Russia attack all those critical elements of the Ukrainian infrastructure amidst the vehicles, in a hope that Ukrainian population will start to put pressure on the government and force it to accept a favorable condition just to stop this war.
In what's your sense? In August, we saw one of the fastest advances of the Russian military, about 15 kilometers in a day, near Dobropilya. Do you have a sense, or do you expect that a breakthrough will be possible? I mean, I know that this was a very fast advance for the battlefield today, but this is not a lot of terrain when we're talking about the geography of Ukraine. It's significant, today in the fight that we're experiencing, but it's not a breakthrough to maneuver warfare. Do you think that it's possible to achieve something like a breakthrough, or do you think that the risk of collapse is real?
To answer this question, would need to be a little bit back to how Russians fighting.
Yeah.
What's their primary tactics now? So what Russia is trying to do is to use those gaps and the lack of manpower in Ukraine experience, the gaps on the front line, to infiltrate through the front line and then engage Ukraine command and control centers, engage the drone operators, or flag the Ukrainian forces.
Yes.
Because there are not so many Ukrainian forces at the forefront, this is a somewhat successful strategy. And they often find really significant gaps to infiltrate. It's 100 and 1,200 square kilometers front line, so you always can find some weak spots to get through. The problem of that strategy is that you go in your foot, and that's not much speed you can use to exploit those gaps, and this gives Ukraine a lot of time to actually plug them if you have a few sub resources. While new breakthroughs are possible, and while generally the situation is unsustainable, it is really a question whether Russia can exploit the gap even if it achieves it. Especially now when they increasingly suffer from the lack of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles. Because partly their strategy is not only a result of the changing character of military fractions, the result of the deficit. Their production rate just not sufficient to cover all those losses that they experience. For years, they've been relying on the stocks of the Soviet stocks of the military equipment that they renew and restored and deployed to the battlefield, but now it's running out. And while they can sustain some level of mechanized warfare, because they still produce sometimes some infantry fighting vehicles, it's just not sufficient to that extent that they need to really renew maneuverable warfare, even if the conditions would rise.
And when we talk about unsustainability, what's Ukraine's theory of victory? I know that the new Minister of Defense, Fedorov, has some strategies that they involve upping the kill rate, destroying more enemies per month. But what's your sense? We know that those weak spots exist in the front line. We see Russia inching forward at great human cost with tremendous losses, but they are making some kind of progress on the battlefield. What's Ukraine's vision for how to win this war, how to stop that advance, what's Ukraine's theory of victory?
Essentially, it's to trust Russia economically, militarily, and politically. Economically, Ukraine is betting on the Russia increasingly visible financial problem, recently visible structural disbalance of the economy, inflation, the liquidity, budget, and so on and so forth. They are pushing their partners to increase their financial pressure on Russia, to use new sanctions to fight the shadow fleet, but also use deep strikes to create sanctions of their own and to harass Russian oil industry and oil export, which is primarily the source of the revenues for Russian federal budget.
And when we see these two theories of victory, and when they meet on the battlefield, what do you think are the where can they take us? And what are the factors that will be decisive?
Before I jump to that,
Please.
the second part of briefly. And on the battlefield, Ukraine's primary strategy is to create these Q zones. Zones in front of the forward positions, saturated with reconnaissance and strike drones, which are really hard to cross and which result in heavy losses for the Russians where they attempt to do that. Because even though Russia managed to trade, it comes at great cost for them. They are losing 35,000 people as killed or wounded every month.
Yes.
And that's approaching close to their mobilization rate.
Yes.
On average, they mobilize about 35,000 people.
Yes.
What is not least problematic for Russians is the fact that the number of reversible and irreversible losses can also change. Because if typically historical ratio was 1 killed to 3 wounded, in case of Russia, it is worse than 1 to 1 now. So basically, they are losing 12 soldiers as killed for every 10 wounded.
Yes.
And this partially a result of the changing character of military actions. Drones is somewhat more lethal than artillery fire. They can also prevent evacuation or retreat because you control the front line, you can see all the movements, and you can precisely strike on the targets. This is partly a result of the exhausted armor fleet of Russians, because now they cannot operate tanks in very fighting bits and fighting foot, which leave infantry more vulnerable. But it is also partly a result of Russian tactics, because if you infiltrate, so the front line usually get a lot of evacuate forces from there, they still some losses.
Well,
from this perspective, Ukraine is betting on further increasing those later attrition. The 50,000 that been had told about. If Ukraine achieved that, that will create problems for Russia, because they are not proud of people, that's obvious. They have quite large hero reserves. But it's one thing to have 20 million of people in reserves, and it's entirely another thing to find them, to deliver that to the training centers, train them, win them, to find officers to lead them, and to do it quickly and to do it in sufficient parts rate. This is not impossible, but it will create significant problems for Russians. Partly of the organizational and bureaucratic nature, partly of political and economic nature. Because previously, if they need to increase the mobilization tempo, they just increased the sign-up bonuses, which attracted more people to sign up contract with Ministry of Defense. But now economic problems actually limit this option. They can go for more forcible options like they did in September 2022 and now the new partial mobilization. But that's politically risky. And not least importantly, it's economically risky, because if people start to go into hiding, if people start to run out of the country in hundreds of thousands as they did the last time, that's a significant pressure for the Russian economy, which already suffered from the lack of workforce and which already not in good conditions. So if Ukraine managed to achieve these targets, it's not break Russia immediately, but it will create quite a few frequencies for them and will likely force them to decrease tempo, which might help to stabilize the front line.
Dear listeners, if you're looking for more of our content, make sure to check out our website, where you will find all of our services along with our weekly analysis. Follow us on X, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn for fresh updates.
And when we talk about enhancing the density of the kill zone, right? I mean, not just lengthening it, right? Putting it farther into the Russian rear, hitting second and third echelon targets, but also making the fire support there denser. The problem that I have heard, I just returned from Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk and Kharkiv Oblasts, and the problem that I heard over and over again is that there's not enough people, and oftentimes there's also not enough money. And money here being a stand-in for UAVs, for UGVs, for strike, but also support assets for logistics, for casualty evacuation. When we talk about increasing, stabilizing the front line by creating a denser, more punishing kill zone, what do you see as the main challenges to doing that? Is that the manpower situation and mobilization? Is that the support of Western partners? Is that just money itself? Right? I mean, what are the factors that are most important to achieving that theory of victory or moving toward it?
Especially everything I'm suggesting. There's something in terms of money you have compensated with people.
Yeah.
people, we have to compensate with firepower, which in our case primarily means drones, which in its turn means more money to produce actually those drones, but also additional people or just other kind of people who are trained to operate those drones. But it also is a significant organizational challenge, because on a lot of part of the front line, the problem is not that they doesn't have sufficient number of drones, or that even doesn't have sufficient number of people. Sometimes the problem that they not organize the process properly.
Yes.
And that's really a significant problem because it's a large mobilized army, and quality of commanders, quality of troops, and the success of different level of effectiveness of different brigades vary significantly. But there are brigades which are not that rich in terms of money, in terms of the equipment they possess, but they still manage to hold the front line. And there are brigades which have a lot of things, but they still don't manage that. Because when talking about kill zones, why very careful coordination of the reconnaissance capabilities, drones, and also not drones on the tactical level, but increasingly drones on what is called the ISO strike, because tactical level increasingly more and more oversaturated. You just cannot win that much by increasing the number of drones on the tactical level. So that's really a number of challenges that Ukraine has to resolve here, and that brigades in the ground have to resolve. Some of the things are doable, some of these things are harder than that, and that depends on what will actually depend on what inputs. Whether mobilization system will reform, there become more people, which will give pass to one-way force, or if it's not happened, that whether we will be able to have more drones, or whether brigades will be able to adapt and would their efficiency compensate for the first deficiency of manpower. So that's different scenarios that many play. Yeah.
I'm curious, and perhaps this is a bit of a philosophical question, but we've seen the introduction of an e-point system, which is not the sort of fundamental system of allocating resources, but it is one sort of secondary system of allocating resources, where units that score more kills, that score more points on the battlefield by conducting effective operations, are rewarded with points where they can buy additional kit. I'm curious, we also saw the prioritization for soldiers returning from CSFC or AWOL to the assault forces, and we've seen the growth of certain units that they've grown a lot, and a lot of resources have been invested into them. But at the same time, I think that one of the really important questions is the difference between offensive capability and defensive sort of hardiness. And when we talk about the unmanned systems forces, we're talking about units that are using drones in a really particular way, right? Like you said, they're using drones to strike the second, third, sometimes even farther echelons. But at the same time, they're not actually responsible in most cases for actually holding the front line. Those are line brigades that often are where you hear the dearth of manpower is the most salient. And my question is, do you have a sense of where resources can be put in an environment where we have very limited resources? How do we make decisions about who to invest in, which brigades, which units, who to help to achieve that goal, right?
Yeah. The e-point system, it had actually mixed results.
Yes.
One part is really giving resources to more efficient brigades. But on the other hand, they twisted their incentives.
Yes.
Because really there are a lot of brigades now, and they're looking for drone duties, hunt down soldiers, that help to hold the front line and house by the front line. And that's of course the problem. What really is necessary here is more comprehensive approach and some sort of the efficiency index, which would include several factors, not only how many Russians are to skilled, but also what is the progress of the front line, whether we managed to make a progress, Russians managed to make it, how much losses was suffered during that, maybe even the recruitment rate, level of AWOLs and desertion and direct metrics to estimate the culture inside the brigade and the efficiency of the commanders. But it really should be a comprehensive metrics. We expect military forces to play as a team and to really synchronize their actions rather than just acting down for voice. That's not to say that this system was entirely bad. It made it impact and had it impacted improved the allocation of resources somewhat compared to what was previously. But it's something that we need to build upon and more further.
Yes. Yeah. And so in your view, what do you think, sort of on the beginning end of 2026, what does strategic success look like for Ukraine in 2026 on the battlefield and also in the negotiation room?
In negotiation rooms, Ukraine position remains focused on several key nuts. On the one hand, that's the escalation in clear directions at the current line. We have not any territory neutrality given to Russia without any legal recognition of the Russian occupation.
Yes.
There's preservation of the freedom of navigation in Black Sea. That's return of the control of the Zaporizhian nuclear power plants, both as a way to alleviate the pressure on our energy system, which started from the Russian attacks and lost a lot of capabilities, which will impact the Ukrainian economic conditions and economic rebuilding further. But also as a way to prevent any sort of the nuclear disaster and nuclear hazards that might result from having this sort of the complex technical station, a continuous occupation of militarization. That's also the return of all the Ukrainian children and the prisoners of war.
Yes.
And of course, the security guarantees to prevent the renewable interactions. This is not the conditions that Russian support is not allowed. Media sometimes focus this discussion mostly on the territorial dimensions.
Yes.
But it doesn't appear to be the case. Even the Russian side, Tushapov, one of the primary negotiators on the Russian side, he repeatedly said that the problem was not only the territorial dimension.
Yes.
Russia strongly opposes the way it is security guarantees that Ukraine might get, especially if those entail any foot on the ground.
Yes.
They oppose the question of the transfer of the control of the Zaporizhian nuclear power station. Though there might be some compromises on the freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, primarily because Russia doesn't have the abilities to force it due to the operation Ukraine approach. But to achieve that, Ukraine needs to break Russian theory of victory.
Yes.
And increase the price for further military actions. Importantly, have to be both. Because if Russia expects that they might achieve victory if they wait for a little bit longer, they will probably be ready to suffer the cost for some time.
Yes.
And if they doesn't suffer any costs, but the front line is stabilized, and Ukraine is not look like it's going to collapse, Russia still might bet that we don't lose much for trying, and maybe situation change in the future. It is essentially to create both those conditions: to stabilize the front line, to ensure this entire defense, to ensure sustainable international support, but also to increase costs for Russia, example, economic causes. And if Russia find out itself in the conditions where it cannot advance further, it cannot expect that the international systems will dwindle, it cannot expect that Ukrainian society collapse, but it increasingly have problems with sustaining its economic stability, it's increasingly have concerns about the stability of the regime, it might start to move for the way out. And it will essentially align our foundation for real negotiations and for fair conditions on the Ukrainian side.
And what are when we talk about strategic success in 2026, what role do partners have to play in this? The Europeans, the Americans. I know that Patriot systems are still the most robust air defense we have against ballistic missiles. What's your sense of what success looks like in Ukraine's relationship with Europe and with the United States?
One of the primary issues that remains is the future of Russian forces assets.
Yes.
They're important because it's an opportunity to quickly get a large sum of money.
Yes.
It can be then translated into a large number of military capabilities quickly, which could significantly boost its firepower, its logistic abilities, but also can help to at least partially resolve the mobilization problem by basically mimicking the example of Russia and opening signing up almost as for Ukraine lower tiers.
Yes.
The decision to give Ukraine a loan can partially compensate for that, but some is uncomparable. And there was some spread through several years, both of economic sector, the Ukrainian defense, of course, much more significant impact the desolation of the Russian assets will have much more significant impact. This would also partly help Ukraine with their defense at the Patriots by ability to acquire them.
Yes.
So the situation is not critical because certain funds are available thanks to the European support, but it could be better.
Yes.
Another thing is the Russian shadow fleet and the sanctions against the Russian oil exports. Because Russia, while it successfully managed to bypass those sanctions, and even though there were more decisive attempts to stop Russian shadow fleets to operate in the Baltic Sea, for example, those seem to subside now, and those doesn't seem to be systematic now. But it is essential, and it's probably one of the most significant way European countries can contribute to the end of the war in Ukraine to stop Russian export in those waters that they control.
And when we talk about these things, I mean, I hate to think about the negative scenario, but I'm curious what your sense is of what the scenarios are that we may be approaching, or maybe sort of in the realm of possibility for the termination of this war. Can you lay out a couple scenarios in your view for not just you've talked a lot about how we get there, what the theories of victory are, but what those might look like in either case, and what that would mean for the world, for Europe, for Ukraine. Maybe for Ukraine first. I mean, that's certainly I think here the most important. But yeah,
for Ukraine,
and also what there's a whole lot of questions that'll come up immediately after any kind of ceasefire, and I think that it's easy to say that war is bad, but the peace that will follow this war will also be very challenging. What are the questions that you are looking toward as a strategic thinker? On day one of a ceasefire.
So with the scenario first, with there for Ukraine, primarily problem for Ukraine, primary risk for Ukraine is the collapse of the front line.
Yes.
The question remains whether Russia will be able to exploit it if it's
yes.
But even if the progress is slow and Ukraine just cannot stop it, that might be a significant issue.
Yes.
And by slow, I mean faster than now, just not like the typical breakthrough by the start of maneuverable military actions. Why the front line might collapse? It eventually is the question that we repeated again and again due to these talks at the Manpower. Ukraine just doesn't have enough people to sustain the social front line. Ukraine tried to compensate it with drones. It works partially, but the question, what is the limit of this compensation and how much Ukraine can innovate? Because we have to understand that Russia also constantly introduces counter-innovations and they're constantly searching for a way to overcome the Ukrainian strategy. So what is the limit to the innovations that Ukraine can introduce under these conditions, and whether it will achieve this limit faster than Russian aid to be exhausted?
Yes.
That's the primary question. Whether we go to this scenario and how much is the risk in this scenario, it really depends on when the Ukraine will be able to figure out its mobilization system.
Yes.
And it's positive news that Rambo talks about it, and the new Minister of Defense says that it's his priority, so it might get some attention that actually solve.
Yes.
On the Ukrainian side, if it managed to stabilize the front line, if it managed to go get into the negotiations, have a much higher leverage, it will be able to achieve all those conditions which made the ceasefire acceptable and to slide foundation for nation after that. The primary question I would look into is how is this ceasefire going to be resolved? Who will be responsible for calling whether it was violated or not? Because you see, there is certain political problem here. If it's the person who facilitated this ceasefire and who bet his political reputation on that, this person or a country that was involved in the negotiation process might have incentives to actually jump the blind eye with any violations just to preserve this heritage, just to preserve this with ceasefire. So that's one of the problem. Whether we will have an independent observer that really be able to call for the violations. And if we have that, what will be the sanction for these violations? How big, how severe they're that, when they're effective enough to deter a new aggression. But ultimately, I think whether new aggression happen or not will largely depends on Ukrainian capabilities and whether Ukrainian can actually stop a new aggression on the ground. So that's the primary mean of with the primary mean and the primary factor on which the future of Ukraine depends, and to a large extent the security system in terms of the European continent.
And that's a great place to leave it. Thank you for your time. It's a pleasure. Before we wrap up, a quick note for our listeners. At KI Insights, we're launching a new premium product line called Defense Analytics. This is a dedicated defense analysis service focused on the battlefield reality, defense technology innovation, procurement and industrial signals, and how the Russian military is adapting over time. It's designed for people who need more than headlines and who rely on structured, decision-ready insight. Defense Analytics is produced by an expanded team combining direct field exposure, senior defense expertise, and our existing political and economic analysis. The goal is very simple: to support the decisions and investments of Ukraine's friends in government, industry, and the security community. We are currently opening early bird access. If this sounds relevant to your work, you can sign up by filling out a short form linked in the episode description. It takes just a minute. After a brief vetting process reflecting the sensitivity of the information, we'll get back to you with more details about Defense Analytics and how to access our first report.